Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. It's that time again, and everything you see here is for sale. Names of watches, references, and where available, prices in the description below. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing, condition, photos, details of everything you see here. And if you want to sell a watch, we are stocking up for the holidays, paying our highest prices of the year. Reach out to me directly if you want to sell one watch or a full collection. No upper limit on sale value. tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Okay, let's take a look at three watches that really peg the meter. Sports watches all, we're starting with a big piece. Now, though this watch has been around for 10 years, it has never been hotter than it is right now, especially given its recent discontinuation. The Rolex Submariner Hulk, the 116610LV Lunette Vert, is a superb and historic first for Rolex. Although we had a green bezel sub from 2003, the full green dial and bezel makes this one a breed apart. Green, of course, being the Rolex corporate color, there is no more distinctly Rolex watch than a Submariner in green. It's only about 12.7 millimeters thick, so it does fit underneath the cuff, and though it's a 40 millimeter watch, with the super case, it reads more like a 42 on the wrist, but it is flat, one of the flattest and thinnest divers you'll encounter. Now, taking a quick look at the dial, you can see one of the most appealing traits of this watch is that there are two different greens. One is a sunburst metallic on the dial that Rolex originally described as green gold, and then you have the Kelly green gloss of the ceramic insert to the bezel. You have the world's best bezel with a wonderfully silky glide and a sharp detent all the same. There is a sapphire insert for the bezel pearl. Let's hear this one. And you can line up that bezel pearl with the white gold minute hand, and you've got a 0 to 60 minute count up timer. Simple, understated, satin finish 3-link Rolex Oyster bracelet, and then we have the glide lock system. So you've got 10 steps of 2 millimeters for incremental adjustment. Remember, a standard Rolex watch has the 5 millimeter easy link in or out. This gives you a lot of adjustability. It could be a small adjustment, or it could be an all-out adjustment for use over a dive suit. You choose. Now, the watch includes a caliber 3135 movement, which is chronometer certified, and 300 meter water resistance, so the watch is both highly water resistant and highly accurate. Never more collectible than it is right now. This is one of the all-time greats and the first ever green on green Rolex Submariner. It is a model that will live in the Hall of Fame. This is a watch that pays tribute to the Hall of Fame, as Omega and Rolex both supplied the British Ministry of Defense, but it is Omega that directly pays tribute to the Seamaster 300s issued to the Ministry of Defense during the 1960s, and they did so with this 2019 release. This is the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter 007 edition, and while it does pay tribute to Agent 007, it's more of an homage to that 60s Diver 300, or I should say Seamaster 300 meter, as issued to the British Armed Forces. And you can see that there is a Ministry of Defense large triangle, tri-spoke, chevron, whatever you want to call it, is visible on the no-date dial. And note, this is the no-date dial. Everything here has a sort of tropical browned out fade. There is Fotina. It's a handsome complementary color here, but I know that's a controversial step. I do think this watch would look weird with conventional white lume, however, so I think the choice was well made. You'll also note that the indices and hands are blackened for lighter contrast. Everything here is satin finished to reduce glare. You can see the conventional polished bevels are gone. Everything has been brushed. And then on the dial, not only is it anti-glare, but it sits underneath a sapphire, and it is a sapphire that's wildly cambered to create that off-axis plexiglass distortion you would have seen on the original. There's a handsome chainmail bracelet with a 60s style straight bar junction with the case. You can see individual gusseting for the holes, allowing the conventional buckle to operate as it would with a strap. So this all works like a strap. Very supple, very comfortable, titanium like the watch itself. This is a titanium timepiece. The buckle, also all of satin finish, has twin trigger release, and you tuck the excess length underneath so there are no minder loops. There's no excess length visible. The case back, tribute to Ministry of Defense markings, but also a nod to 007. As you can see, his agent number, and 62, the year of the first official James Bond movie, Dr. No. 007's logo down at the base. 55-hour automatic winding power reserve, amagnetic, 300 meters water resistant. The helium escape valve is there, and of course it is a master chronometer, which makes it both very tough and very accurate, just like the Rolex, but to a different chronometer standard. And you can see, though thicker than the Rolex, at 13.7 millimeters, it will fit underneath the cuff. Very comfortable on the mesh bracelet. I've seen this watch on a conventional strap, but this is the way to buy it. Let's do a quick lume shot with those two. Okay, first the Rolex. You can see with the Hulk, we've got Rolex Chromolite Blue Lume. We have that luminescent bezel pearl that's covered by sapphire for durability. Of course, all three hands are lumed. I don't know why any dive watch doesn't have a lumed seconds hand, but Rolex is doing things the right way here. Now, switching over to the Diver 300 meter, you can see that Omega does things a little bit different. First, the entire bezel is lumed despite its ceramic insert. It is much like a Tudor Pelagos in that regard, having the luminescent bezel as well as the ceramic insert. There's also differential lume between the bezel pearl and the minute hand, so you can quickly tell the pearl, your reference point on the bezel, and the minute hand apart from the rest of the dial. Good looking watches both in the dark. You get a sense of their relative visibility side by side. Omega wins this one, but Rolex, I mean, you know what watch this is just by looking at the lume shot. It's iconic. That said, this is my favorite of the three sports watches that are opening today's show, and this really hits home. I've always liked the Zenith Defy El Primero 21, but I never liked the open dials, which means the Panda variant was the only one for me. Well, launched for 2020 in 250 pieces in media blasted and blackened titanium, this is the Zenith Defy El Primero 21 Land Rover. The Land Rover series of Zenith watches date back to 2016 when the partnership started, and they have always been in exceptionally good taste, with the branding discreet or completely invisible on the dial side. Now you see, it is a fully solid dial, and I think this will stand the test of time better than the open-worked versions, or perhaps I should say open-wrought. The only Land Rover branding here is on the case back, where you can see it on the case back of the watch, as well as the 5-spoke wheel pattern of the rotor, which has a Land Rover blazoned on one of those spokes. All of this is 100 meters water-resistant and COSC certified as a chronometer. It comes with two straps, one full rubber, one a combination of rubber and textile, as you see here. It's 44 millimeters in titanium, so it's very light, but it's only 50 millimeters lug to lug, so you can wear it on a smaller wrist. Now, there are two separate movements in this case. There's a power reserve at 12 o'clock for the manual wind 50-minute chronograph power reserve, and you can see why it's so short-lived. The 1/100th of a second foudroyant seconds hand is keyed to a second escapement and a second balance, so there's two movements and two power supplies and two balances in this case. The one beats away at 100 beats per second, so you can resolve 1/100th of a second, and then the other is the conventional El Primero movement, which beats away at 10 beats per second, 36,000 vibrations per hour. That side of the watch has hacking or stop seconds, a first ever on an El Primero, but note that you can actually stop the time and run the chronograph and vice versa. The timepiece, of course, powered by caliber 9,453 joules and exclusive to Zenith. It borrows a little bit of technology from the Tag Heuer caliber 360. Throw it on the wrist, and again, in titanium, relatively short across the wrist. Though it's a large watch, it's easy to wear. It's very comfortable. I'm going to pull my sleeve up so you get a good sense with respect to my wrist. It's a very comfortable watch for a smaller wrist, so I would recommend it for wrists as small as 14 centimeters circumference, and it really does feel like a second skin being as light as it is and on a strap. This is my favorite of the Defy El Primero 21s. Now let's take a look at two different kinds of watches, both of them from Geneva. We're talking about the Vacheron Constantine Harmony Triple Calendar and the FP Journe Chronomet Optimum Black Label. Starting with the Vacheron, this was part of a series of watches that launched in 2015, the cushion case of the Harmonies, designed to evoke Vacheron watches made in the 19s and 1920s. So the timepiece, though 41 millimeters in diameter, and that's what my caliber tells me, 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. It wears larger than that. It's not thick at under 11 millimeters, but you'll see when I put it on my wrist, it has the presence and stance and wrist real estate of a much larger timepiece. Visually, it reads a lot like a 43 millimeter watch. Now in red gold, that means it has a ton of presence, though you can see it is low and easy to slip under a cuff. The case is fairly nuanced. As you can see, the bezel itself is a cushion within a cushion, stepped up from the case flanks. The lugs are nicely sculpted with a handsome taper, and then you can see there's a little bit of an inward step at the tips of the lugs. Now the watch is a triple calendar, paying homage to the great calendar watches of Vacheron Constantine, which often included Le Coult and later Jaeger Le Coult Ebauche. This is an all-manufacture product from Vacheron. You can see there's a lunette date indicator, and then very traditional first quarter 20th century red on white day and month discs. There is a moon phase, and we have these lovely transferred lacquered numerals on a slightly off-white silver base so that the dial doesn't appear too cool. It has some warmth to it. Turn it all over, and like I said, this is a Vacheron movement. First, you'll note the Poinçon de Genève on both the movement and the case, as since about mid-2012, the Poinçon de Genève has been a full case standard for finished materials and execution. The rotor is 22 karat and cut on a rose lathe, so that's real guilloche, not the stamped kind. And then you can see Geneva hallmark movement, 28.8 beat rate, 40-hour automatic winding, ceramic rotor bearings, and a feature that a lot of high horology calibers for some reason don't include, which is hacking or stop seconds. Roll it over one more time, you can see the finish is exemplary. The Côte de Genève are rather thin, but they're richly crested and deep, and you can see that there's mirrored anglage on the edge of every bridge with black polished screw heads featuring chamfered slots and circumference. Good looking watch. You can see a full deployant clasp in matching red gold, but of the two, I have to admit my favorite is the Chronomet Optimum, and I'm generally not a Journe guy. There's a lot to recommend this watch, and as you can see, the timepiece, which is impressively stark with white metal case and black dials, part of the Black Label series. Originally invented back in 2008, the Black Label series was designed for those who were shopping at FP Journe boutiques and espaces, so it was limited by vendor type. You had to have previously purchased a new FP Journe to qualify to buy at those boutiques and espaces, and then even if you qualified, no more than 2 examples of any given model could be made per year. So this is the best of the best and the most exclusive, even in the context of a brand that builds fewer than 950 watches a year. Now, getting a little bit closer, you can see there's a lot going on the dial. FP Journe designs his watches. He's not just an engineer. So this dial is his own doing. Power reserve indicator. It will run for 70 hours, but it will maintain constant balance amplitude for about 42 to 45. So you want to wind at the same time every day. Now, there is a window into the deadbeat second. You can see that there's sweep seconds on the dial side, but when you turn it over, the remontoir d'égalité constant force spring, which ensures the barrels never directly drive the escapement, that acts as the underlying mechanism for deadbeat seconds. This will actually revert to scroll seconds when you get below 45 hours of power reserve remaining. And take note, when indicating 0, that means 0 hours since fully wound. That means full. It's a chronometer style power reserve. So a lot going on here. This is the most accurate mechanical watch FP Journe knows how to make. And I think it's important to shout out the fact that there are several layers of refinements, starting with 2 mainspring barrels, which give the watch a very even torque release from max wind to minimum wind. We then continue to 6-position adjustment. If you look at the Octa automatics, they're adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer. This is adjusted in 6 positions, 1 more than a chronometer. Then you've got the constant force device, ensuring that no matter how tightly wound the barrels, the balance will not be overdriven. So that is the constant force device that ensures the balance amplitude remains the same, high or low mainspring wind. You also have a double direct impulse escapement system, and you can just see the twin escape wheels. There is no Swiss lever here. The wheels directly escape against the balance, so against the roller jewel, they impulse the balance each only in one direction, so it's direction of travel, respectively, from left to right. You'll also note that the free sprung balance has an overcoil hairspring, a feature you'll only find on a handful of watches like the Chronomet Optimum and the Tourbillon. So it has many different features, allowing it to keep excellent time in any orientation and at any point in its first 45 hours of power reserve. Of course, the bridges and plates are of rose gold, the case is platinum, and as a result, the watch is massively heavy. This is a very special watch from FP Journe, my personal favorite. It originally hit the market in 2012, and it remains to this day the most accurate, purely mechanical FP Journe. It's also worth mentioning, and I'll just give you a little sense of reference, this is 43 millimeters, this is 42. This is the largest size available for the Chronomet Optimum. It is the upgrade size. 40 was traditional for this watch. It's important to note that because I feel the dial breathes better in the 42 than in the 40. All of these disparate elements and the asymmetry play better in the bigger case, which is why I recommend this size for the Optimum. You also get a full deployant clasp and matching platinum. That's a rare feature to get with a Journe watch. It was an upgrade made at the point of sale. Now let's talk about this watch. 43 millimeters in diameter, and you can see this is an extraordinary timepiece. This is the 500-piece limited edition Portugieser F.A. Jones. From IWC, this is the 5442, launched in 2005 and built through 2006. It is a fusion of IWC pocket watch design and Portuguese design. As you can see, the dial is a 12-layer hand-buffed lacquered construction. We'll get as close as we can here. This is the same technique that was used for the Jubilee 150th anniversary collection, and essentially what you're getting is you're getting a case that is the Portugieser with integrated blended lugs, minimal bezel, thin case band, and a pocket watch movement on the inside, but the specific decoration of that pocket watch movement is of the 19th century. The crown, onion style, is pocket watch inspired, and the dial is not the Art Deco or Bauhaus form follows function fusion, and Art Deco and Bauhaus are different things. The Portuguese, as originally designed, embodies a bit of both. This watch is more like Bauhaus and 1880s dial design, as you have those Breguet-style hands. You have the traditional sub-seconds that you'd find on a Portuguese, but the font used for the numerals is anything but that 1930s font that debuted with the watch in 1939. You also have a little railroad track for the needle-style counterweighted seconds hand, and the movement, which is caliber 98290. It's always been a pocket watch-sized movement in the Portugieser, but here it's designed to look like a pocket watch movement with damascening across the bridges and that extended Jones arrow adjustment index that you would have seen on the F.A. Jones era IWC pocket watches. It's important to note that F.A. Jones of Boston, Massachusetts, was the American founder of IWC in the eastern part and German-speaking part of Switzerland back in 1868. The French-Swiss wanted nothing to do with the American interloper, but the German speakers were a little bit more open to American production techniques, and so IWC was founded in Schaffhausen by an American, and this is a tribute to the way those watches looked during the era of F.A. Jones, whose name is on the dial. And as you can see, the watch features a matching platinum pin buckle to suit the case. 43 millimeters in diameter. It's important to note that the IWC Portuguese, along with the Panerai 3646 combat watch, two of the very first oversized wrist watches, and this was certainly the first oversized dress watch that was designed from the beginning as a dress watch. For the Portuguese importer, the watch was designed to be as accurate as a pocket watch, but in a wristwatch format, which literally required at the time putting a pocket watch movement in a wristwatch case. A quick look one more time at this movement. It beats away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. It's adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer. It has a handmade Breguet overcoil hairspring for excellent timekeeping in any orientation. And it has what might be the world's largest hacking lever, as you can literally see the hacking lever moving just beyond the tip of my finger. It has a 46-hour manual wind power reserve, and as you can see, it has a wonderfully extended click and click spring that also pays homage to the mechanics of the pocket watch era. Now let's talk about two very different takes on sports watches, although in fascinating form, they do reflect more or less the same time frame. This was launched in 2005, and it was the beginning of a new generation of IWC Ingenieur, but it was also the beginning of the partnership between AMG, Mercedes, and IWC. Back then, it was more of a tribute to AMG road cars. Today, the companies remain associated, but it's more of an alliance built around the Formula One program run by Mercedes and AMG. This is more of a road car tribute. So if you've got yourself a Hammer, if you've got yourself a C43, C36, an old school pre-merger AMG, they are the coolest, but heck, AMGs are all a ton of fun to drive. This is the watch to wear. The 3227 is about 42 millimeters, just slightly larger than that. It's about 42.5, but in titanium, it's very light. It's also anti-magnetic, 120 meters water resistant, and unlike the successor Ingenieur, this one's powered by IWC's own movement. So you have the 80110 44-hour power reserve bidirectional Paul-based Peloton winding system, quick set date hacking seconds, and a remarkably handsome construction, the likes of which I have to admit you will not see, but there is some peace of mind knowing that IWC paid as much attention to the inside of this watch as the outside. The media blasted finish is exactly like that on the Zenith, but whereas the Zenith is blackened, this is more natural titanium. Of course, the watch retains the profile of the reference 1832 Jumbo Ingenieur, created by Gerald Genta for IWC back in 1976. So this is a real Genta design. This is not a wannabe. This is authentically descended from a Genta of the 70s, the same way today's 5711 Nautilus or 15202 Jumbo is. This is very much of that lineage. Now, if we turn the clock back just 7 years, we find ourselves in Loloc at Zenith with the arrival of the A384. You know, the A386 is probably the best known of the original 3 El Primero models, but the A384 in a lot of ways is a more interesting watch with a very 70s-esque cushion-style case. While the watch was designed in the 60s, it was very much of the 70s. You can see that lapping machine radial graining emanating out from an imaginary center point. You can also see, though this is a cambered sapphire, it gives you that same distortion off-axis like we saw with the Omega Seamaster 300. Before, that Diver 300 meter had the same effect with a bubble-shaped sapphire designed to look like a vintage plexi. You have a panda-style dial with a remarkably punchy tandem of pure white and black. That's not silver, that's real white. And then the 37mm watch includes a ladder-style bracelet that both looks and feels like a real 70s bracelet. Someone who doesn't know the hallmarks of modern watch construction, for example, display casebacks, could easily mistake this watch for the real thing because the bracelet feels and even sounds so authentic. Now, while it's designed in the style of famed bracelet maker Vacheron, it's important to note that that company was bought up by Rolex, so this is very much in the style, but it is not a Rolex bracelet built for Zenith. You can see just how authentic the buckle is, right down to the stamping of the company name and the relative austerity. This is a trip back in time, and I've never experienced a bracelet like this in brand new condition, so it's fascinating to encounter one that was built new manufacture for a special series. It's a caliber 400 Zenith El Primero on the inside, which means mechanically it's very much a modern watch. And I'll get close to the case back one more time. It's got all the hallmarks of the El Primero: bidirectional automatic winding, column wheel, and lateral clutch, 36,000 vibration per hour beat rate, 52-hour power reserve, and it does feature a quick set for the date, though as ever, the 10 beat per second El Primero does not feature conventional hacking. This is a timepiece that wears exceptionally well on a small wrist, as it's just over 46 millimeters from lug to lug. I'm not going to recommend a lower limit for wrist size. Anyone, male, female, big or small wrist, can wear this watch with a lot of panache, because it is the most authentic vintage timepiece reissue I've ever encountered. With the exception of the display caseback and the sapphire crystal, this thing could almost pass for new old stock. It's that good. Now let's talk about sports watches, including one that has just come back from AP factory service. This is the reference 26300 ST. It's one of the last of the 39mm Royal Oak chronographs. So it's got that perfect size, but it's also got perfect condition. As you can see, this one's still clad in its tape. I'm not even peeling the cover off the bezel. I want you to be the first to do that, but I want you to know what you're getting. You're getting a watch that is right back from factory service, as good as it has ever been from the hands of the masters who made it. You can see that the condition of the case, razor sharp separation between satin and bevels, the bezel with tons of depth. As you can see, each individual white gold bolt is still deeply countersunk. They are not level. That recess is what you want to see when evaluating the condition and depth of a Royal Oak bezel. As you can see, the crown guard structure, glinting, gleaming, sharply defined, and the timepiece substantial in the hand. You can also see the somewhat older style, single-fold logo style deploying clasp built into the bracelet, and the highly desirable tricolor panda with white, black, and red. And there's a lovely red on black track outboard for reading the minutes and the chronograph seconds. This is one of the best of the best. Frederic Piguet 1185 automatic movement inside, vertical clutch, column wheel, 40-hour power reserve, screw down crown and pushers, surface swimmable, and loomed. This is a watch that puts it all together, right down to a bracelet that takes between 10 and 12 hours to manually finish, and that's just the bracelet. That's before we get to the bezel or the case. A truly special watch and a great example of a highly sought generation and a highly sought case size. Now in 2014, Patek launched what I consider to be, frankly, the ultimate Nautilus. Sure, some are more expensive. Sure, some are vintage and thus bestowed upon a special status, a charm, but at the same time, this is the one that can replace 3 or 4 watches in your collection. It's everything a Nautilus is, right down to the proportioning and the style, but it's also a travel time watch with a brilliantly hidden trigger system that doubles as the wing of the Nautilus case. You have that second time zone until you don't want it, then you can cover it up. The watch is a chronograph, but it's more than a chronograph. It's a flyback chronograph. Reset and restart with no hesitation. Do you want to know whether it's day or night, home or away? This watch gives you 2 AM/PM indicators, so you have night and day for both home and local time zones, and that is exceptionally rare for a travel time watch. You've got a radial date, you've got a 60-minute chronograph indicator. How rare is that? And this is a timepiece that gives you all of that despite the through fittings, still 120 meters water resistant like a standard 5711 would be. There's a lovely fade to the dial. As you can see, it's gradient from a sort of silver black at its center to genuinely black outboard. And I've always felt that the Nautilus was slightly better resolved than the Royal Oak, because on his second pass at this style of watch, Gent decided to conform everything, not just the bezel, but also the sapphire and the inner bezel to the shape of the bezel. And you can see on the Royal Oak, as much as I love it, it was the first, the inner bezel and the sapphire are round, whereas on the Nautilus, the contours of the bezel are also those of the inner bezel and the sapphire. There's just a better continuity to it. You also get the longest power reserve available on the Nautilus right now, as the caliber CH-28520 has an up to 55-hour automatic winding power reserve, but it's got more. It's got a silicone hairspring that's anti-magnetic. It has a free-sprung Gyromax balance. With the Patek Philippe Seal 6-position adjustment and the silicone hairspring, you get a watch that's guaranteed to run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day from the factory. Now you throw it on, and here's the real surprise. It's 40.5 millimeters in diameter. It's only 12.8 millimeters thick, which means it's virtually as thin as a Submariner. It easily slides underneath the cuff. It's comfortable, and you can wear it on a small wrist. This is as good as it gets in the world of sports watches, as it makes absolutely no excuses and needs none. A timepiece that you literally can wear all the time, including in the shower. A timepiece that could be your only, that could replace 3 or 4 watches in your watch box. Let's do a loom shot. I'm back with the Nautilus Travel Time Chronograph, the 5990, and as you can see, there's plenty of loom right here. Absolutely no doubt about what time it is. This is a watch for day or night, surface or subsurface. Let's give it some competition. Last year at Baselworld, the traditional 5726 changed, and it gained a little bit of the charm of the 5711, and then some, as Patek Philippe replaced the previous dial option, a gray gradient fade, much like the 5990, with blue. And here we get not just a blue, but a brighter blue than is found on the 5711. That blue could be mistaken for a sort of slate gray, whereas on this dash 014 model, there is no confusion about what color that dial is. It's brighter, it's more cheerful, it's sportier, and as you can see, it still features an annual calendar. It's still 120 meters water resistance. It keeps everything you loved about the original, and it remains only 11.6 millimeters thick. Now, the timepiece, of course, with the annual calendar, need be adjusted only once a year during the jump from February to March. It features a caliber 324 base, which is finished as nicely as the 28520 you just saw, and it's just as accurate. It does have a slightly lower power reserve, though, of 45 hours, but it doesn't really matter because this is the kind of watch you can wear every day. As with the 5990, the water resistance, the durability, the anti-magnetism, and a style that's universal and can wear with anything invites you to wear this watch even at times when you might ordinarily deposit a conventional luxury watch on the bedside dresser. It's also a watch that easily slips underneath the cuff. It is low, at under 12 millimeters thick. It's thinner than a Rolex Daytona, and we all know how well those wear with cuffs. It's beautifully finished, and like the other Nautilus, the 5990, the premium price of this over an Aquanaut, yeah, it's the complication, but the 5711 costs what it does compared to the 5167 on a full bracelet because of the complexity of finishing a more involved multi-piece case, and you can see how subtle the finishing is, right down to those lovely hairline bevels. A lot of work goes into completing the shape, and as you can see, it features that same Nautilus characteristic of the shaped sapphire and inner bezel. A truly glorious watch, and a complication Patek Philippe invented in-house in 1996. An annual calendar Nautilus is Patek's most distinctive and famous original complication, with Patek's most famous and original design innovation. Now let's bring in a real Jaeger-LeCoultre dive watch. JLC just launched the new Polaris Mariner Memovox, and while it's an attractive timepiece, it's looking backwards. Back in 2009, In titanium, in 1,500 pieces, JLC was looking forward. This is the watch built for the U.S. Navy SEALs campaign, which was essentially a co-branding agreement between U.S. Navy SEALs and Jaeger-LeCoultre. Obviously, it was never worn in combat. Obviously, this is not military issue. But the spirit of the SEALs is what imbues this with the look of a modern dive watch. So at 45 millimeters, you might expect it to be huge, but it doesn't wear that way. I could easily wear this watch every day, and you can see that's down to relatively short and stubby lug profiles. It also has a ceramic insert in its diving bezel, and we'll have a listen to the diving bezel right now. It's meaty. It's like the bezel action on a Doxa sub or a Luminor submersible. You really feel and hear it. With the ceramic insert, you get a nice scratch guard protecting the rest of the case as the bezel and the crystal tend to take the blows. But it's grade 5 titanium, which means this is the stuff that resists scratches even better than steel. And it's a diving alarm. And it has the same movement as the new Polaris Mariner Memovox. So you get the same degree of vocal watch alarm. That is the quick set system. Quick sets work like that. And then this is how you set the alarm. You wait for the, if you want to demonstrate how this works, you wait for the hour hand to budge a little bit. It'll sound for up to 30 seconds if you fully wind it. Inside the case, caliber 956, 45-hour power reserve, automatic winding, 300 meters water resistant, of course, 1,500-piece limited series, and you can see the U.S. Navy SEALs warfare device. The eagle over an anchor clutching a pistol and a trident, which is basically how you spell badass without words. This is a timepiece that is extraordinarily forward-looking, and it has JLC's best bracelet. This is vulcanized rubber-wrapped titanium, silky against the wrist, incredibly durable. You can see it has not aged in time. Every individual link is removable for perfect sizing, but then there's also a double deployant quadruple trigger actuated clasp, and as you can see, you get more adjustability built in here. That thing is not popping open by accident. There are 2 micro adjusts inside, just like Rolex Easy Link, only get 2 of them, each one 1.5 millimeters, allowing you to pull out each side or push in each side to micrometrically fine-tune the fit of this watch. This is as good as divers get, and it's begging for a loom shot. Let there be no doubt, that is as good as loom shots get. You can also see the font used is a tribute to the Polaris 68. JLC, ever aware of its history? Back in the day, it used to reference its history without plagiarizing it. Today, there are too many re-editions in the catalog for my taste. Okay, 2 big pieces, both in platinum, both on a bracelet. These watches are nuts. Let's start with the FP Journe. Now this is a timepiece that represents a rare full bracelet FP Journe Tourbillon Souverain. It is also a seriously early Tourbillon Souverain. As you can see, the case back is stamped 04TN. TN is the reference of the watch, and 04 means that's the year the case was made. It should be remembered, this being a rose gold movement, the year the rose gold movements were introduced was 2004, and this was one of the very first. It has an exceptionally low serial number, though I've covered it up to protect innocent parties. It was one of the first 3 dozen made with the rose gold movement. As a result, it also features an earlier version of the bracelet that includes the Eleanor maker's mark. So this is not Boîtier de Genève. This is the original French factory that built FP Journe cases from the time of his first pocket watch in 1983 through about mid-2008. So this is not a bracelet you could easily replicate, as the maker's mark stamps on it are obsolete and highly collectible. Now on the wrist, very comfortable watch to wear, iconic, thin, flat, unisex. I would even say that if you're petite of wrist or a lady looking for a monster complication and a power watch, this is definitely going to do it for you. The watch has the look of a bigger piece, even as it doesn't quite wear that large, and I'll show you what I mean. You can see that lug to lug, this is not a large watch. Lug to lug, this is only approximately 48 millimeters. which means if you have a 13.5 centimeter circumference wrist, you will be able to wear this watch on the bracelet with security, proportion, and panache. It's also low enough to fit underneath any cuff, and all in platinum with a rose gold dial, a rose gold movement, a platinum case, white gold clasp, and platinum bracelet. It feels massive. It feels like a 45 on the wrist, even as it has the physical dimension of a 40. Now, taking a look at the dial, you can see there's a power reserve that, like the Chronomet Optimum, works backwards. It indicates 0 when it's fully wound, 42-hour power reserve, deadbeat or jumping seconds. In the last 12 hours or so of power reserve, that reverts to scrolling to keep the tourbillon running. Overcoil, free sprung, 6-position adjustment. The tourbillon is gorgeous, and the finishing speaks for itself. Just know that the point of this watch is accuracy. Not every tourbillon makes that claim. However, with the remontoir d'égalité constant force device, for the first roughly 28 hours of power reserve, the watch will maintain constant amplitude, which is an extraordinary chronometric achievement. That said, if you want water resistance with your full platinum complication, then you want this. This is the Rolex Day Date 40 baguette indices on a dial surrounded by a paved bezel. Each individual baguette graded for color, clarity, carats, and the cut identical in every instance. An optical scanner is used to match them perfectly at Rolex. You have the ice blue dial, 40mm case, 3-day power reserve, 100-meter water resistance, and for the Day Date 40 generation, we have every individual pin inside the President bracelet coated with ceramic so that over time, the platinum links cannot aggress against the pins, cannot thin them out, and thus end for good Rolex bracelet stretch. That is one of the unseen advantages of this model. An extraordinary piece with an extraordinary look. Nevertheless, it's also one of the most masculine applications of diamonds you're going to find. So whereas I would not conventionally wear two-tone, yellow gold, rose gold, or a flamboyantly diamond set watch, this one is understated, cool, collected, and almost austere in that it's stark. All of its tones are pale. It glows, but it's not glam. This is my kind of diamond set watch, and on the wrist, the feeling of that full platinum bracelet and case with the platinum solid case back of a Rolex watch, you can feel where the money was spent, and it is a pleasure. Finishing up, this is new for 2020. This is the Resence Type 1 Slim X. Olive green dial. It features a new, slimmer profile thanks to a caliber ETA 2892 instead of the 2824 that used to power the Resence watches. There is the 115-piece ROCS Resence Orbital Convex System module. There's an olive green dial with continuous satin finish, and it moves in a planetary fashion. Let me show you how this works. You have, I'm going to get close now, several different indications, and I'll tell you how you can tell what time you're looking at. As you can see, an hourglass replacing 10. For 10 years of Resence watches, you can see this right now is 10 o'clock. Is it 10 in the morning or 10 at night, or 10 p.m. that is? If you look at the 7-day indicator, you can see the pointer, the indicator, is right in the middle of the arc, which means the middle of the day, which means we are looking at 10 a.m. And of course, everything moves, pivoting, even as the dial spins on its axis. So it's a little bit like planets in a solar system, each one orbiting while itself spinning on its axis. The loom shot is incredible. There is a caseback lever that makes it easier to set the watches with no crown. This 42mm titanium timepiece is set with the caseback, and if you wish to manually wind it, it is wound with the caseback. You can see how the caseback looks, very conventional. This was a upgrade introduced on the Type 1 Squared that is now general on the Type 1s. And on the wrist, comfortable, easy to read, low in profile, handsome, almost biomorphic and organic, a pleasure to wear. Let's do a loom shot. One of the great unadvertised advantages of Resence watches, how they look after dark. Their loom is world class, and as you can see, everything is loomed. The seconds indicator isn't a conventional seconds indicator, but you can see that it combines with the hours, the minutes, and having a separate second display. This is a true regulator dial, even though you might not think of it as such. And we finish with the best. Launched in 2016, this is the Lange und Söhne Richard Lange Jumping Seconds. 39.9 millimeters in platinum. You can see this watch is part of a limited edition for the release of the model of 100 pieces. It is slim in profile, and at 39.9 millimeters, it is a very compact wear. It features a dark rhodium dial with a safer triple overlap scale, and as you can see, it too is a regulator with hours, minutes, and jumping seconds on separate tracks. Taking a quick look, you can see there's a lot going on. Don't be deceived by the apparent simplicity. Several complications are at play here. First, you have the jumping seconds. Second, you have a power reserve indicator that indicates when you get down to the last 12 hours of the 42-hour power reserve. But you also have a zero reset second system. And when we flip to the reverse side, the watch features a remontoire d'égalité, a constant force device that's similar to the one in the Journe, but it releases via a different mechanism than a linear spring, meting out bursts of energy to drive the balance. So this is a different system than Journe uses, and I'll bring the Journe back for a moment. You can see the Journe is a straightforward linear spring, whereas the construction in the Lange is more involved, but then again, you would expect that of German engineers. And you can see how the balance beats away. It has variable inertia blocks. It beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and it features a freehand engraved balance cock with a black polished swan's neck, and that's the real difference here. While this and the Journe both maintain constant amplitude for most of their power reserve, this watch is more finely finished, and that is just a fact. Lange watches include more manual finishing than a Journe. It starts with the freehand engraving of the balance cock. It continues to the true mirrored anglage on every bridge, as well as the fact that the watch includes both black polished and fired blue screws. Journe just used black polished screws. Here you have both fired and black polished. You can see, if you look very carefully, that the jewels are set in golden chaton, and this is a nod to the pocket watch era, as is the three-quarter style bridges. This watch is designed to evoke the period of Saxon pocket watch design that preceded the collectivization of watchmaking by the communists during the 1950s. Everything is immaculate, right down to the glasuta stripes and the engine turning on the base plate. One more look on the wrist. This is a special piece in many regards, as there's a lot of complexity with no fewer than 4 separate refinements or complications. The timepiece wears easily, comfortably, and discreetly on the wrist. It even features a lovely Lange pin buckle that's just rife with innovations, including an elevated bridge so that the strap sits flush inside the buckle rather than stacking up underneath, and a little retaining bar, so if you're like me and you tend to buckle down to the smallest hole, you're not going to get the strap pinned on the pin, so to speak. It's easier to extricate from a small wrist. The Germans thought of everything, which is one of the reasons I love this brand. My favorite detail, however, the vaulted Lange und Söhne logo across the top of the dial. Remember, email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.